because this was the person in charge of the Ghislaine Maxwell prosecution, summarily fired by Trump thereafter. We now have an update about her employment in court. Can you explain what just happened?
Brian, this is really a potentially far-reaching judicial ruling. It may not sound that way. It may sound like it only affects Maureen Comey, James Comey's daughter. But boy, this could actually be disastrous for the Trump administration. And here's why. Maureen Comey was one of the most highly regarded federal prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. She was heading up the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, indictment, and what would have been a prosecution if he hadn't ended up dead in his jail cell. She was the lead prosecutor on the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. And of course, the jury convicted Maxwell across the board of several charges in connection with her being part and parcel of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring. She was also a hands-on perpetrator, and fired her. Now, there was no reason to fire her. Not only was there no reason to fire her, let me just read the opening salvo of the judge's ruling, because you're going to see just how badly this went for the Trump administration when a judge opens on the following. Mind you, when Maureen Comey is suing the Trump administration, the Department of Justice, for wrongful termination, here is how the judge opens his ruling. Maureen Comey was, by all accounts, an exemplary assistant United States attorney. In her nearly 10 years working at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, she was assigned some of the country's highest profile cases, and she consistently received the highest accolades from supervisors and peers alike. But Comey is also the daughter of James B. Comey, the former director of the FBI and longtime target of President Donald Trump's ire. And in the spring of 2025, prominent supporters of President Trump began to call for her ouster based on that connection. And on July 16, 2025, only one day after the U.S. Attorney's Office assigned Comey yet another high-profile matter to handle, President Trump's supporters got their wish. Comey was notified by email from the Department of Justice officials in Washington, D.C., that her employment was terminated effective immediately. And put a pin in this next sentence, because this is going to come back to haunt the Trump administration. Comey was given one and only one reason for her removal, Article 2 of the Constitution, which vests the executive power in the president. Brian, I think our viewers can see where this ruling is going when Maureen Comey says, I was wrongfully terminated by Donald Trump for a performance-based reason. But the Department of Justice, Donald Trump's administration, really has been enamored of firing people by giving them no reason other than saying, hey, it's the president's Article 2 prerogative. Well, guess what? That term has just come home to roost, and it will haunt the Trump administration probably for the rest of Donald Trump's term. Why? Because there is this whole statutory structure in place. So there is what's called the MSPB, the Merit Systems Protection Board. What does that do? It protects federal government employees, civil servants, from being fired for political reasons rather than performance-based reasons. Now, our viewers are going to have to stick with me here, because this gets a little down in the weeds. The MSPB, that board that protects civil servants, was set up by what's called the CSRA of 1978. And here is the kicker. If Donald Trump and the Department of Justice, his administration, when they went on this firing spree after Donald Trump took office the second time, if they had simply said, well, we're terminating you in accordance with procedures to, if you want to contest your firing, they didn't say any of that. What they said is, Trump is firing you pursuant to Article 2 of the Constitution because he can, because he's president. Well, guess what the judge ruled? Because that was the reason given for Maureen Comey's firing, she doesn't have to go through all of the procedural niceties by bringing her challenge first to the Merit Systems Protection Board. She can maybe eventually make her way into federal court to sue for wrongful termination. But of course, Brian, in the interim, what has Trump done? He's decimated the Merit Systems Protection Board. So it's backed up a mile long. In February of 2025, he summarily fired, and nobody will ever be able to make their way into federal court to challenge these terminations. And the judge said, you know what, Trump administration, Department of Justice, you're out of luck. You said you were firing her pursuant to the president's unfettered prerogative. That means she doesn't have to go through all those procedures. She can go right to court. She can file her lawsuit, and let's get our litigation on. I'm obviously paraphrasing the way the judge put it, but I'm doing it for emphasis. So, Brian, when I read what the judge just ruled, the phrase that comes to mind is, it looks like Donald Trump and his DOJ have been hoisted on their own petard.
Is being punished because of the fact that she was in charge of and knows all of the accurate information about the Epstein investigation and the Maxwell prosecution. And beyond that, isn't there more that she can do from the outside by, for example, waiting to be subpoenaed by a Democratic oversight committee once midterms come and go than she would be able to do from the inside, where presumably she would be barred from saying certain things or speaking freely because her boss would be, high-ranking DOJ officials who are clearly more deferential to Trump than to the truth.
Brian, it's a great observation and argument, and I think you should be advising the Democrats in the House at this point, because you're exactly right. If Maureen Comey had remained part of the Department of Justice, she would have to be radio silent, right? She couldn't say anything about her knowledge of what's in the Epstein files, courtesy of being the one who was getting ready to prosecute Jeffrey Epstein himself and the one who did prosecute Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirator. Yet, perhaps because she has this lawsuit pending. But you know what? She knows where all of the Epstein and Maxwell bodies are buried, figuratively speaking. And I think, it's a twofer for the Trump administration. One, this is Donald Trump speaking, she is my avowed enemy, James Comey's daughter, so I want to retaliate against her. And she knows too much about Epstein and Maxwell. Therefore, if she ever decides to come forward and speak publicly about what she undoubtedly knows is still in the Epstein files that has not yet been disclosed by Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche or Attorney General Pam Bondi before him, all of those failures to disclose are in obvious violation of federal law, the Epstein Files Transparency Act. If Maureen Comey would start telling the public what she knows about what's in those files, oh, she's just a disgruntled employee,
right,
because she was let go. So you can see they were trying to kind of pre-sully her by firing her. So I think it was a Trump twofer. Punish her because she's Comey's daughter, and make sure you do everything you can to try to diminish her credibility in the event she starts speaking the truth about what she knows is in the Epstein files. And there's a third nefarious benefit to this. Remember, Todd Blanche was the one who went down to that Florida prison and accepted all of the lies that Ghislaine Maxwell told him, that Donald Trump never did anything wrong, that Jeffrey Epstein never did anything wrong, that she never did anything wrong, notwithstanding being convicted by a jury of her peers of, I believe, a total of 6 felony charges and being ordered to serve 20 years in prison. She never did anything wrong. And Todd Blanche, and this makes my blood boil as a former career prosecutor, didn't even confront her with the mountain of evidence that the jury used to convict her, hands down, of her crimes. Instead, Todd Blanche accepted all of those lies, sort of figuratively locking them in so she could never walk away from those lies without running the risk of lying to a federal official, a 5-year offense, so she would always remain quiet on anything Donald Trump may have done that she knew about. So it's kind of almost a 3-for-1, not just a 2 for all kinds of reasons to want to, diminish, to marginalize, to push, onto the sidelines Maureen Comey for all purposes.
Well, if we get to a point where Democrats win the midterms and take over control of Congress, and you have a Democrat-led, Robert Garcia-led oversight committee